Welcome once again to David English. David, we're going to stick with China as we mentioned last time. Things are really going on. Things are hotting up, if you can term it that way. But I'm going to start off with a fundamental question. We've received various notices this week about Islam and what is in it for them. What are they planning? What is Iran planning? And out of it's come the Canton issue that they want 130 out of these worldwide. They want dominance. And this is mankind, if you wish. But what do China, are they dangerous? What do they want to do? Is it world dominance?
Yes, it's in the Chinese constitution. I have a book. Where is it? I have a book here. Okay, within here is a treatise written by two generals of the Chinese military who retired in 2001, and their gift to the nation was essentially a war strategy to take over the West, therefore the world, without having a kinetic war. It's called unrestricted warfare. So they will use everything in their disposal other than kinetic warfare. It's like a more insidious but cowardly version of the British Empire, right? No direct confrontation, but they'll use trade, they'll use crime, will use culture, they will use politics, bribery, they'll use human trafficking networks, oil smuggling networks, drug trafficking. They'll use all of these things together to try and bring down the cultures in other nations so that they can have a cultural dominance. So, for instance, the Chinese are very keenly aware that when a society is saturated with sex trafficking and pornography, the moral level of the society declines, and the willingness within the gentleman to fight for that society declines also. So, one of the biggest exporters of pornography and sex trafficking in the world is the Chinese government. And we find the same thing with drugs and fentanyl and everything else. So, yes, they are absolutely after world domination. It's in their constitution that China cannot rest until every country is taken over and freed from the evils of capitalism, and that there will never be a communist nation until every nation is communist.
Well, certainly they've done that with fentanyl, haven't they? It's a hideous drug.
Yeah.
And they're flooding the states.
Yes, I think a lot of people aren't aware that the fentanyl might be going over the border by the Mexican drug cartels, who it appears are being protected by the Mexican government, by the way, but it's being made in China. Now, the thing with fentanyl is there's a website called minghui.org, which is a Chinese startup website that essentially one of the things it did was to record persecution, particularly of Falun Gong practitioners in China. Now, one of the things on there that alerted me to how depraved the fentanyl thing is the Chinese are injecting their own citizens in incarceration and in prison camps with what the people who are giving the reports are just labeling as unknown substances. But these people are either dying or becoming paralyzed and disabled after one injection. So the likelihood that the Chinese government tested fentanyl on its own people to create the drug that they wanted, because they want you in one hit to either be addicted, disabled and out of action, or dead. It's a method of warfare. So fentanyl has been used as a weapon against the United States. When Trump ran the first time, I mean, I thought Trump was a cartoon character. I genuinely did. And then I went and read his policy. I read Hillary's and I read his. And knowing what I knew about China and what he was trying to do with fentanyl and the wall, and I thought, actually, I understand that. Yeah, because I know that the Chinese government are using fentanyl as a war strategy to try and destabilize the American government. Because if you've had a Class A drug like fentanyl, you are automatically, I believe it's still the case, you are automatically ruled out of being able to serve for the US military.
Interesting.
And I believe any military, like you, because you can't have an LSD flashback whilst flying an F-15 in a combat zone, right? So it's like they are decreasing the ability of the American military and the American population to function as a force to tackle China. This is one aspect of their warfare.
You mentioned Trump there. Trump is at least aware of things going on because, of course, he's introducing this protection bill. And it involves Falun Gong. Now, this is a Chinese religion. Is it Christian? What is it?
Yeah, I think you can classify it as a religion because it's kind of like, the best way to describe it is it's a meditation practice, something like Tai Chi or yoga, but it has a very deep spiritual foundation to it because it's rooted in the ancient Chinese culture, which is actually an incredibly profound, deep culture. Everything that ancient Chinese did had like a spiritual significance to it. Even the way their clothes were cut and measured, it all had to kind of do with the relationship between man, heaven, and earth. So I think, Westerners would classify it as a religion because it is so deeply spiritual, but it doesn't have any worship or things like that. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's Christian either, but it doesn't, what's the word?
Do they proselytize?
Explain that for me.
Do they
Sorry?
proselytize? Are they seeking for converts?
No. I think it's one of those things where if you're interested in those things, if you're interested in meditation and even martial arts and things like that, then you're free. I think from what my experience, the main thing that they're after is we're being basically persecuted by the Chinese government, and this has to stop. I mean, I've worked with a lot of these things for years. I've helped people on the organ harvesting projects. I've had my phones tapped. I've been approached by Chinese spies. There's a lot of stuff there that people kind of don't realize. And the main thrust of everybody involved in these things is this needs to stop. This is what the Chinese government are doing, and it's kind of evil. But I wouldn't say it's not against Christianity. It doesn't sort of conflict in that way. It's not like Islam or whatever,
Yeah. Now, what about body parts? Allegedly, they're not complicit, of course, in this Falun Gong, but they are being used. Are they getting members of this, I'm going to say sect? It isn't a sect after what you said. It's just part of the Chinese culture. But where are they getting these body parts from? Obviously, people. Are they particularly choosy? We know the Uyghurs have been involved in this. Do they put people in prison? Do they extract kidneys? Anything from a person's body? What's going on here?
So, I mean, this is huge. Okay, so in 1998, there was a census that showed that the founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Hongzhi, was more popular than the premier in China at the time, and that more people practiced Falun Gong in the parks in the morning. They would go and do their meditation, then they go off to work, than were in the Chinese Communist Party. So the Chinese Communist Party, by the order of a guy called Jiang Zemin, he created like an extrajudicial branch of the government to bypass all of the laws and to try and persecute this group of people. And essentially, they ended up with half a million people in prison who were nameless because they refused to give their names. Because in China, if you get caught doing a crime, it's not just you that gets punished, it's your entire family. So wherever the government at the time determines being a crime, like owning a Bible is a crime in China, your whole family will be punished for you owning a Bible, right? So people would be nameless, and they realized they had all these people in prison. And we can see from the transplant data that China goes from doing like a minuscule amount of transplants a year, 1,000, 1,500, to suddenly hundreds of thousands into 1 million transplant operations a year. And they can't provide evidence of where these bodies are coming from. But there was a group of gentlemen. There was David Matas, David Kilgar, and what was the journalist's name? Ethan Gutmann. They spent years investigating this, literally ringing hospitals and saying, I need a new kidney. Can I get a new kidney? Can you make sure it's from a Falun Gong practitioner? Oh, yes, yeah. We always use Falun Gong practitioners because they're so healthy. So this went on and on and on. Now the Chinese have a weird statistic where they not only do the most, I believe, the most amount of organ transplants, but they also use the most anti-rejection drugs. So if your kidney failed, they would just go and get another person and get another kidney. But when they do the operations, they believe in order to cut down on the amount of anti-rejection drugs they need, the blood has to be as pure as possible. So they won't use anesthetic. And the first thing they will do, this gets a bit graphic, mind, for anybody who's a bit squeamish. The first thing they will do is cut the trachea so that you can't scream. And then the surgeons descend and they take out the corneas, the lungs, the heart, the liver, everything else. We know that this is going on for certain. We've had several whistleblowers come forward and say, yes, I was a part of this, and then they've had to just disappear for safety reasons. I think more will come in the future. It's almost like we have the body, we have the smoking gun, we have the bullet, but what we don't have is the footage of them pulling the trigger. So we have everything else except that one bit. And I think if China wasn't in the political dominance that it was, I think something would have been done about this a very, very long time ago. But it's looking like there is anywhere in the region of, I would say, 100,000 to maybe 500,000 people a year being executed for this particular barbaric crime.
This is a problem because it's like the UFO thing, isn't it? Where you've got people saying, show me the little green man. Let me talk to him. And the little green man isn't there.
A little bit, but in this instance, it's like they have the craft. They have the eyewitnesses. They have everything except the little green man, right? So everything else is in place. So there's no doubt that it's going on. China has even said, "Oh yeah, well, look, we will reform," but they're not really ever going to reform, and they're just buying time. And over what started out as literally using almost exclusively Falun Gong practitioners, they've since expanded it to, like you said, the Uyghur Muslims, Christians, human rights lawyers, anyone they can butcher to make money off, really. And it's quite horrendous when you really look into it. It's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. Even when, you see the exhibitions of those bodies where they've been injected with plastic and the body's been melted away, that's generally Falun Gong practitioners. And the bodies are coming from a factory next to a prison camp in, is it Changchun? Where the disgraced head of the region, Bo Xilai, ran. And the guy who started, Dr. Gunther van Hagens, he couldn't get a degree in Europe because everyone thought he was a lunatic. So he went to China and got a degree in China and then set up this plastination factory next to the prison camp in China, because your veins start to collapse after 24 hours, right? So they claim that everyone's donating their bodies to science. You'd have to die in that hospital for that to happen, because they've got to inject you almost immediately, which means your loved ones can't say goodbye. The body can't be prepared. If you logically think it through, they'd have to get you out of wherever you are, put you on a stretcher, put you in a bag, put you in a helicopter, fly them to here. Like all that time, your body's breaking down, which makes the process less and less possible. So, and when the people have examined the bodies in the exhibitions, they've got organs missing. And you're talking like there's pregnant women and all sorts being used, So it's absolutely gruesome. And it's far bigger and probably far worse than everybody thinks. And I think that one of the things that's going on is a race against time. China needs to get dominance globally, because this will break. This will break in a big way globally. And when it does, if China isn't in control of the entire world, China is finished. Like the CCP is finished, right? Because the West will just move in and arrest them and probably hang them. So they know that this is a fight for their lives, and it's the untalked about backdrop to everything that's going on. Like literally everything that's going on is China racing to get ahead of the game, ahead of the US, because it knows the US will hold them fully accountable for this.
Well, the Chinese Navy, of course, has just overtaken the number of boats that the Americans have. So that's a preparation, surely, and in other ways.
It is, yes. The thing with the Chinese army is it's largely forced conscript. So their soldiers are incredibly weak. There was that great video when they had that skirmish with India in like 2019, and they were taking the Chinese lads up to face off the Indian army, and they're all on the bus crying because they don't want to be there. They've got a crack squad which do want to be there, but the majority of them don't. But you've got to remember that the same people making the Chinese technology for their military ships are the same people who make our microwaves and TVs. They break. They break after 18 months. I remember reading somewhere that there's a report that there's only 50% of CCTV cameras in China work at any one time because they just break, because it's rubbish, because they have no ethical standard to make anything. They cut corners on everything.
This is the other thing, of course, that Flavor of the Month, it's called TAT. TAT is being sent out to the whole world. If you buy a doll, it will last you 5 minutes. If you buy a doll that's made in the UK, Europe, America, it will last you 2 or 3 years. Now, I mentioned doll because Trump has mentioned this particularly. Nothing lasts in China, but they take in advantage, the allegation is, the Chinese are, of the fact that the West cannot resist a bargain.
So I will speak from the British point of view of what I know about this. So if you think back, Ronnie, you're old enough like me. Everything came with a British flag on it. And if it didn't have a British flag, it had an American flag. And you remember, we wouldn't even touch Japanese stuff, let alone Chinese. Remember? Sanyo was all this Japanese crap. We don't want that. And that was literally what people would say, you know, like Dixon's and Curry's and stuff couldn't sell half the stuff because it was made in Japan. Wasn't made in the UK, Germany, or America. So you had an Aniston washing machine. It would last 20 years. People used to get them when they were married, and they would buy a new one when their kids left home. You'd have an Aniston cooker that would last forever, right? TV, you'd buy 10, 15, maybe 20 years, right? VCRs would last 20 years. Everything lasted a hell of a long time. Then everything shifted. So one of the things that happened in the United Kingdom was we got rid of all of our industry. We couldn't make anything. So we had no customs and excise. We couldn't leverage any pounds for the treasury because we didn't have any, right? We weren't making anything to leverage against. So we became a consumer-based economy with essentially tech centers, call centers, which I think is ridiculous, putting all these young men with all that testosterone and all that grunt to offer, and you shove them in a call center. It's ridiculous. So Gordon Brown gathered the heads of industry together in 2001, and I know this for a fact, right, that he, particularly the car industry, this is one example where I was told verbatim, he gathered them all together and just said, the British aren't interested in quality. We need rubbish that essentially breaks down 3 to 5 years, so they have to buy again. And that's basically what's happened. So we have no actual economy. Our economy is now based on us having to purchase over and over and over the same thing again and again. We're being milked. We're basically being milked. And we need to stop doing this. Now, China will happily supply that tat. That's why after Hurricane Katrina, they bought up all the world's wood supplies. So the price of wood went through the roof. A scaffolding board went from being £5 in 2004 to being like £32 in 2012. They buy up all of our scrap metal. They melt it all down and then make cheap, inferior versions of it where, you know, our copper strands might be 32 strands thick. Theirs is like 3 or 4. So everything's going to break. They overclock the parts in the labs so they will last 18 months and a day, right? So this is what's going on. And again, it's they're milking money out of the West and sending it to China. And Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were very deeply, closely aligned with the Chinese government. Always have been. Always have been. So it's like it's part of this strategy to absolutely gut the West. And it has to stop. We have to stop buying tat. If you remember, before Brown came in, you couldn't get credit for anything. You would have to sit and have a meeting with the bank manager, remember? And then all of a sudden, everyone could get credit. There was cars everywhere. Remember? You used to go from like, you couldn't even, not every family could afford a car when I grew up. Not every family could afford a TV when I grew up. And then all of a sudden, everybody has every modern convenience under the sun. But then the debt balloons, people are under constant pressure financially, but the quality of it is horrendous. You're getting a new TV every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Now, mentioning all this, I'm thinking about what they're up to, the Chinese, talking to Uzbekistan. Well, we know they want a route direct to Europe. Now, at the moment, everything comes out by boat. It's cheap, but it takes a long time. Now, there are various routes. There's the northern route through Russia that they could go, but there's a problem. There's always problems with Russia. Might not appear to be on the surface, but there is between China and Russia. So the middle route is the one through Uzbekistan, and that's the one, and ultimately through Turkey, that they're appearing to want a new Silk Road. Now, there again, that's going to be rapid by train, by road even. Is this all part of the grand plan?
Yeah. They need to be the central hub of everything. That's their plan. Everything gets made in China, and then they can hold everyone to ransom. It's the mark of the beast, basically. China is the beast in the book, or the CCP, I should say, is the beast in the book, right? So they need this global domination for everything to work. You know, there's only two countries in the world that don't have China as their main trading partner, and that's Britain and the United States. We are kind of the holdout, right? We do not want to go fully into that, but everyone else has gone lock, stock, and barrel into making them their main trading partner. And this is where the tariffs come in. You need the tariffs because China have been using tariffs against the West since its inception into the World Trade Organization in 1999. Now, essentially, they managed to leverage the same emerging state or emerging country status that Namibia has, right? Now, China, huge nation, huge economic nation, has enjoyed all of the protections that some tiny third world country has. So they're allowed to wantingly tariff everybody else, but no one's been allowed to tariff them. So the tariffs with Trump are important because a lot of China's actual finance comes from the US market. They need trade from the US market. They need the trade coming through Temu and Shein and everything else. So I think Trump understands that game very well. And what Trump's essentially trying to do is to kick the Chinese government out without having a war, because the Chinese government lives on grift. And if the money runs out, they can't grift anymore. And then the loyalty will just fade away.
China allegedly is full of slaves, slave labor. That's how they make their parts and electronics. 50% of it is exported to the world. Is it true that they're slaves? And how do you categorize a slave? By the amount of money he's allowed to earn?
So there's a few things that I think. So if you start digging down into this issue, starting from the most simplistic, it costs a man to work, let's just say £100 a day in Europe, £100 a day in America, £100 a day in Australia, £100 a day in Argentina, £100 a day in New Zealand. But yet in China, somehow that man can work for $20 a day, right? It doesn't add up, right? So there's something there where they're artificially falsifying the economy to their advantage. Now, there was an instance in, when would it be? 2007 or 2008, where I read a report, a large contract had come in for, it was somebody like Panasonic. And it was a huge manufacturing contract to manufacture TVs. And the local police just basically went and rounded up 1,000 people to put in the labor camp factory. And they were then there to work for free until the orders were fulfilled or the contract stopped. So this is going on. Now, do all of their employees get paid slave labor wages? No, of course not. Of course not. I don't think Apple can get cheaper labor in China, but there's a reason that the labor is so cheap. And it's because other things within the economy are being either neglected or are being done with slave labor in order for them to drop the overall value. And the products are being made in a cheaper, less ethical, less quality controlled standard as well, which drops the price. But they are certainly using their massive labor camp system for slave labor, particularly, silly things like Halloween decorations, chopsticks, absolutely disgusting conditions that they're made in. Yeah, you'll find it in a lot of tat is probably made with slave labor. A lot of the more skilled stuff is maybe not, but there will be instances where they do, like I said, just round people up and force them to make products.
What's the university quality like over there for training people, technical people?
Well, the Chinese are super intelligent. They have, when you look at the bell curve, they have a very high median intelligence. It's like 120 or 118 or something, which is quite high when you think the average intelligence in England's somewhere between 100 to 110. So overall, they're quite an intelligent group of people. And the issue that you have is that they're very much taught a Marxist view of everything. So there's certain principles within quantum physics that won't be taught. There's certain principles within history that won't be taught. There are certain principles within mathematics that they won't teach because they believe it goes against Marxism. So although the Chinese are plenty capable, and I have no doubt that they come out, I mean, they're excellent researchers. Chinese are amazing researchers. Their brains just kind of work in that way. I have no doubt that they do have good universities where they're turning out highly educated people to a certain degree, but it is, what are they being educated in? Mm-hmm. That's the difference, because Marxism has to live upon a certain premise that theism is incorrect. So if you're in the realm of quantum physics and you're sort of breaking on things that kind of go, well, hang on, this looks like an intelligent design concept. This looks like this was created by a higher intelligence. They can't really propagate that very far because their whole ethos is based on the higher intelligence not existing. So it is. I mean, I know very few Chinese who aren't intelligent, but because of how Mao shaped the society and how they've kind of continued on, they tend to be crafty intelligence. Does that make sense? So they use their intelligence to getting around the system, to gaming the system, rather than actually doing good in the world. And that doesn't mean that they don't think they're doing good in the world. It doesn't mean that their intention isn't to do good in the world. It's just the way that the Chinese Communist Party has warped them.
Brainwashing indeed. Finally, David, we've hinted at religion. Back to Christianity. Are Christians being truly persecuted in China?
Oh, yeah. Of course they are. Yeah. You have to have state appointed. They have a state appointed head of the church who's selected by the Chinese Communist Party, which is an atheist organization. So that tells you which way that goes. So they created what they call the house Christians, right? And China has a long history with Christianity going back to the Tang dynasty. There's a special pagoda that was built in China, and I forget the name of the emperor, but one of the emperors basically anointed Christ as an enlightened one, and sort of enshrined it within Chinese culture as, Christians were part of, they see Christ like a Buddha. This, I hear this as an enlightened man who came to walk the earth, and they believe that his teaching should have space to exist. But the Chinese Communist Party can't stand it. I mean, this is the sole reason why they persecuted Falun Gong. They couldn't stand that little bit of goodness that was growing. They couldn't stand that little bit of sand in the ointment, right? So they cannot have Christians. They cannot have Buddhists. All of these things. It annoys them because it casts them in a contrast. It's like light, darkness only. You can only tell darkness when you have light to contrast it against, right? So yes, they absolutely do persecute Christians. I think there was when the 2008 Olympics went on, there was something where one of the Christian leaders came out and spoke to the press, and he said, something along the lines of, any book is allowed in China unless it is the Bible and a Falun Gong book. And that's the situation you've got. You've got these two groups of people who are heavily persecuted.
There's great fear against Christianity, I know. And I now realize the reason for this. They're frightened of, obviously, freedom, the Chinese. They're frightened of enlightenment because it goes against their Marxist principles. I know the Roman Catholic Church have had problems, and they've done deals with the top guys in China that they can exist as long as they're controlled.
Well, then it's not the Roman Catholic Church, then, is it? It's the Chinese-controlled state religion.
Mm.
You can't deal with the devil, I'm afraid. You just can't. The only thing you can do is vanquish him. Archangel Michael taught us that. You don't deal with him, you vanquish him. The Roman Catholic Church would have been better to have kind of held firm and made a deal for sanctuary. It's like people go on about immigration, and it's like, all right, okay, so why isn't the West being flooded with Chinese Christians then? Why isn't it being flooded? You know, if we need immigration, why aren't we bringing in Christian Nigerians? Why aren't we bringing in Christian Syrians and Christian Libyans then? You know, there's more going on there than what meets the eye. So you can't deal with the devil. Appeasement, you can't appease things like that. Your only mission is to literally extinguish.
So it's the mission of the church to survive. Is that why the underground church is so famous?
I mean, I don't know what the mission of their church is. I think the will of heaven is is its own thing. You know, to get philosophical or theological, the next great showing of the hand will be the hand of the Creator. Like, we know that's been written. So I think, from what I understand, the whole premise, and this was a great motivator behind the British Empire, everyone is simply kind of trying to get through in a civilized enough manner to essentially make it through the judgment. It's what we have to do. And if you want to get really deep into it, the communism is trying to do the opposite. You know, Marx wrote about this. This is literally like bedded deep within its power structure and its thought logic, is to actually degenerate humanity so it is unworthy of salvation. This is the point. So all of these orthodox religions and movements and philosophies are kind of trying to fight and bring as many people forward to the future as possible. And communism is actively trying to destroy as many people as possible. It wants to make your conduct so low that you are unworthy of salvation. And like I said, this is coded within all Marx's writings.
So you've got to be an atheist if you're a Marxist, from what you're saying.
You have to be. So when, you know, Marx does say atheism, he promotes atheism. I mean, there are darker things in Marx. Marx wrote about pledging his life to the Dark Prince and all of these sorts of things, and forsaking God and taking darker paths. And these are all within Marx's writings. And bear in mind, we only have 10% of what he wrote public. The other 90% is kept under lock and key, because I think it was even darker than what people imagine. So, yes, we're basically looking at the fight between theism and atheism.
Where does that leave us in Great Britain then, with the Marxist regime, somebody calls it at the moment, i.e. Labour Party? You've got a leader there that's a devout atheist, if there is such an animal, a leader that was really left-wing to a communist state, big mates with Mr. Corbyn, of course, before he was sidelined. It's a bit frightening, that, isn't it?
Well, yes, but it also, you know, communism, my understanding is that communism will just vanish. Like, it has to go. It's dying, right? It's going to disappear off the world stage. And you have to get as many people to wake up from that as possible, right? Because you don't want people disappearing with it. So communism, England has a love affair with communism that goes back to Marx. And England was always the great prize, because when all the revolutions in 1789 happened in Europe, and they happened, people think it was just France, but no, every country had this sort of proto-communist revolution in 1789. Didn't happen in England. And of course, America had the antithesis of the European revolutions in its revolution. It was the opposite of what the European revolutions were. So England has always been this island that they tried to capture. Marx really wanted to get England, and he couldn't. And they've gradually, like quietly and quietly, tried, but they've never really exceeded this 30% mark of grabbing the ideological capture of the country. And I think the recent council elections show that. There's something within the English that's deeply spiritual. We are a deeply spiritual nation. There's something within us that's just hardwired. The English for several hundreds of years have been an instrument of the divine. And I think that, there's something I call the king's spirit that lives in the heart of every English man and woman. When it's awoken, they just become an instinctive operator of the heavenly will. So I think ultimately Keir Starmer and the Labour Party will destroy the British Labour Party forever, and they will end the British love affair with communism, which has to happen. It's like a historical inevitability. It has to happen. And they're doing a very good job of it. They're doing a very, very good job of it, considering that Keir Starmer's now come out as probably the most extreme right politician we've ever had in this country since Enoch Powell. They're doing a very, very good job. And all they're doing now is that they are admitting what everybody else is talking about. I'm deep in the red wall up here, proper Labour heartland. I've had Labour Party members come to me and say they want mass deportations. They want an end to this. These are Labour Party members. So the will of the people is not with the government. And I think all the political class have spent 70 years enacting their will, enacting what they want to see. And I think the future very much belongs to the will of the people. I think the future will very much be a spiritual resurgence of peoples, so that people are more in line with, I guess, the heavenly mandate for humanity. That's what I truly believe.
Interesting thoughts, David, as usual. Thank you so much. We will see you shortly.
That's all right, Rodney. Thank you.